My name is Rachel Monroe, 27 years old from suburban Washington, D.C. The day I inherited my grandmother's house should have been a blessing, but it was the moment my family turned cold. What started as silence became theft, lies, and betrayal. They thought I'd stay quiet. They were wrong. Before we begin, ask yourself this: what would you do if the people who raised you, the ones you trusted most, turned out to be the ones holding the knife? Stick around, because this isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about uncovering the truth, reclaiming your voice, and finding strength when no one stands beside you. Hit that like button, subscribe, and let's dive into the day I realized my family didn't love me. I hadn't been in a room with my whole family in over 6 months. Now we sat side by side, stiff-backed and silent, in a law office that smelled like coffee and old paper. The receptionist had handed us all small bottles of water. Only mine was still untouched, sweating onto the armrest of the leather chair. I kept waiting for someone to speak. My mother glanced at her watch. My father tapped his foot, impatient as ever. Aaron, my younger brother, leaned back and scrolled on his phone, the picture of indifference. The lawyer finally entered with a heavy manila folder and a flat expression. His name was Mr. Kent, and he looked like the kind of man who had seen a lot of awkward family moments, but he still blinked when he saw us. "Thank you for coming," he said, unfolding the documents. "This is the official reading of Helen Monroe's last will and testament." I swallowed hard. My grandmother. She'd passed only 2 weeks ago, quietly in her sleep. She was the only person in my family who had made an effort to understand me, to see me for who I was. When I struggled with anxiety in college, she was the one who sent handwritten letters and herbal teas. Not Mom. Not Dad. Just her. The reading began. A few donations to local charities. Her book collection to the community library. Jewelry to a cousin, and then, to my beloved granddaughter, Rachel Monroe, I leave the residence at 1413 Oak Ridge Lane, along with a trust account in her name totaling $150,000. May it give her the space and support to grow into the woman I always knew she would become. Silence. I blinked. The pen in Mr. Kent's hand paused. My heart hammered. I looked around the room. My mother's lips had tightened into a thin, unreadable line. My father stared straight ahead, unmoving. Aaron's phone screen had gone dark in his hand. Not one of them looked at me. No congratulations. No smile. No, she would have wanted that for you. Just silence, and in that silence, I felt something shift. Something cold. Something final. I nodded slowly. "Thank you," I whispered, though my voice cracked. Mr. Kent moved on, but the rest of the will blurred in my ears. I couldn't stop thinking about that moment, about the way my family had vanished emotionally the second I became something more than just the quiet daughter who stayed out of the way. By the time the meeting ended, my parents were already standing, coats on, eyes distant. "We'll be in touch," my dad said vaguely. "Of course," my mom added, avoiding my gaze. Aaron walked past without a word. That was the moment I knew. I hadn't just inherited a house, I'd inherited the consequences of no longer being easy to ignore. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. Maybe my parents were just processing everything. Maybe they felt left out of Grandma's will. Maybe they needed space. But then Thanksgiving came and went, no invitation, not even a text. The year before, Mom had guilt-tripped me for not helping with the cranberry sauce. Now, nothing. Just a cheery Instagram photo of their perfect table, glazed turkey, sparkling cider, and Aaron, front and center, grinning beside his girlfriend. I wasn't in the picture. I wasn't even in the conversation. It was the silence that said everything. When I called my mom a few days later, just to check in, her voice was clipped, overly formal. "Oh, hi, Rachel. We've just been busy." With what, she didn't say. My father was worse. When I emailed him asking for help with some minor plumbing at the Oak Ridge house, he replied 2 days later, "Suggest hiring a contractor. I'm tied up. Good luck." Not even love, Dad. And Aaron? He stopped answering altogether. I messaged him once, just a simple, "Hey, wanna grab coffee?" And the message sat unread for a week before it disappeared entirely. it was as if I'd been deleted. No more Monroe family chats. No more group texts. No more passive-aggressive dinner table debates. They didn't yell. They didn't confront, they just withdrew. I ran into one of Mom's friends at Trader Joe's, Mrs. Holloway, the neighbor who always used to pinch my cheeks and ask about my grades. "Oh, Rachel," she chirped, before pausing, something flickering behind her smile. "We've missed seeing you at the Monroes. Cynthia mentioned you were settling into your own space." I nodded, tight-lipped. "She said you've been distant lately." Distant, that was the narrative now. I had pulled away. I had chosen to isolate, never mind that I had called. Never mind that I sent a handwritten thank you card after Grandma's funeral. They were rewriting the story, erasing me from the family photo, one frame at a time, and the strangest part? I still kept trying. I texted Aaron on his birthday. No reply. I dropped off a bottle of Dad's favorite scotch at their doorstep for Christmas. No call, no thank you. I even baked one of Mom's favorite casseroles and left it at the church's Sunday potluck table. It sat untouched. I told myself I wasn't angry, but at night, I found myself staring at the ceiling, jaw tight, heart pounding, wondering what invisible line I had crossed. What was it about inheriting Grandma's house that made me unworthy of love? The only answer that made sense was power. For the first time in my life, I had something they couldn't control, and in return, they gave me silence, smooth, deliberate, and sharp as a blade. The Oak Ridge house was quiet, too quiet. At first, I chalked it up to the creaks and sighs of an older home adjusting to a new occupant. But the silence inside these walls felt heavier than solitude. It felt like a warning. I had started to settle in, repainting the kitchen, hanging up Grandma's old botanical prints, and trying to feel like the house was truly mine. Most days, I lit one of her old lavender candles and brewed tea from a tin she left behind. Rituals of comfort. But the unease grew anyway. It started with the mail. A letter from the county office arrived, addressed to Monroe Estate. Inside was a receipt, proof of property taxes already paid. Only, I hadn't paid anything yet. I thought it was a mistake. Until I noticed the check number. It wasn't from my account. It wasn't even from the trust. It came from a business checking account I didn't recognize. I tried brushing it off. Maybe it was a final settlement from the estate. But 2 weeks later, I received something worse. A letter from a bank I'd never heard of, thanking me for my recent loan application. Attached was a welcome packet for a $50,000 home equity line of credit, against my house. Except, I never applied for a loan. I stared at the document in my kitchen under the dim overhead light, my breath catching as I scanned the fine print. There it was. My signature, except it wasn't mine. It looked close, too close. A near-perfect copy of my handwriting. The slant, the pressure, the tail on the R. But I'd never signed anything like this. My stomach twisted. I grabbed the folder from the trust lawyer, flipping through it to compare documents. The differences were subtle, but obvious once I knew where to look. The forged signature was clean, too clean. Mine was always a little jittery. A little imperfect. My pulse thudded in my ears as I turned to my laptop and looked up the company name from the tax letter, Monroe Strategic Consulting. The business was registered under my father's name. I felt cold all over. He had used the house as collateral. Quietly. Illegally. He was borrowing against the very thing he told me I wasn't ready to handle alone. My family hadn't just cut me out emotionally. They were robbing me. In that moment, the house I had tried to make my own felt like a trap. I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the walls, at Grandma's photo above the fireplace, and whispered out loud, "They're still in here, aren't they?" Not physically, but in paper, in debt, in secrets. They were still tangled inside this house. And I knew then that it wasn't just about money, it was about control, and I was going to find out exactly how far they had gone to keep it. I didn't sleep the night I found the forged signature. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of cold tea, copies of documents spread around me like puzzle pieces with edges that didn't fit. Every page I turned deepened the betrayal. It started with the mortgage documents, signed, dated, notarized. The notary's name? A distant family friend. One who just happened to be at our 4th of July barbecue last year. Then came the withdrawals. Small at first. A few hundred here, a few thousand there. They were masked under categories like maintenance fees and consulting services. But they all funneled into one place, Monroe Strategic Consulting. My father's shell company, the trust fund my grandmother left me. Nearly drained, I felt like the floor beneath me had cracked open. They weren't just dipping into my money, they were living off of it. I checked the date on the largest transfer, 6 weeks ago, the same week my dad bought a new car. A sleek, silver BMW that he had casually mentioned in a Facebook post. Finally rewarded myself for 30 years of government work. My stomach churned. I didn't know what made me angrier, the theft, or the performance, because they still smiled when they saw me, they still acted like nothing had happened. Last Sunday, my mom ran into me at the grocery store. She gave me a tight little hug and said, "We should do brunch soon, just us girls." I nodded. I smiled back. I played along, but inside, I was burning, because I knew now that every act of warmth was a lie. A distraction. A strategy. I wasn't their daughter anymore, I was an asset. A resource they could exploit, and I had no doubt this went deeper. I called the trust attorney the next morning and asked him, hypothetically, what would happen if someone misused funds or forged documents related to a trust. His voice went sharp. That's a felony. Fraud, at the very least. Possibly embezzlement, depending on the jurisdiction. Why do you ask? I thanked him and hung up. I wasn't ready to go to the police. Not yet. I needed to know how far they were willing to go, how long they'd been doing it, how many other lies they'd told, so I printed everything. Every email, every withdrawal, every forged signature. I started a folder, black, discreet, and tucked it behind the cleaning supplies under my sink, evidence. Because if they were going to treat me like a stranger, I'd become someone they never expected, not quiet. Not easy, prepared, and one day soon, I'd show them just how much damage the invisible daughter could do. It turns out, silence is a powerful weapon, especially when the people you're up against are used to you backing down. For weeks, I played my part. I smiled when I ran into my mother at the farmer's market and complimented her new earrings, knowing full well they'd been paid for with my trust money. I even responded to Aaron's random text asking if I could help him look over a lease, as if he wasn't benefiting from a house his tuition had helped fund. Without ever asking me, I acted like I was still Rachel, quiet, harmless, a little naive. But behind that smile, I was collecting. I spent evenings combing through bank statements and credit reports. I called the notary office and requested verification on every document my name appeared on. I recorded dates, transaction IDs, IP addresses. What I uncovered wasn't just a few bad decisions, it was a full-blown operation. My father had listed himself as a consultant on multiple documents related to the trust. My mother had used the funds to pay off credit card debt that predated Grandma's death. They didn't just break my trust. They built a lifestyle on my silence, so I stopped being silent, not publicly, yet. Just methodically, I bought a small external hard drive, encrypted it, and uploaded every document, photo, and screenshot. I kept a copy at home, one in my glove compartment, and one mailed to a friend out of state, just in case. I even began writing it all down, every detail of the betrayal, every memory I'd tried to suppress. It wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about truth. It was about control, how they'd always held it over me. Deciding what I could wear, who I could be, how much of myself I was allowed to take up in a room, and for once, I had something they couldn't erase. One afternoon, I showed up at their house unannounced. I brought fresh scones from the bakery near my place. My mom welcomed me in like nothing had happened. My dad nodded from behind his laptop. We sat at the kitchen island, sipping coffee and chatting about the weather. About Aaron's new job at a DC law firm, about how the neighborhood had changed. They had no idea I knew, no idea I was watching every move, memorizing their tells, noting every lie layered with faux concern, and that made it easier, because the more they pretended, the clearer it became. They believed they'd gotten away with it, but I wasn't planning to confront them anymore. I was planning to expose them, on my terms, with my voice. The daughter they once ignored had become a shadow. Behind the curtain, listening, documenting, waiting, and soon, their perfect little world was going to crack wide open. Her name was Maya Trent, a journalist I'd met 2 years earlier during a nonprofit fundraiser I helped organize. Back then, she was writing about systemic failures in family court. We had exchanged numbers after an emotional conversation about generational abuse. I hadn't expected to ever use that contact, but now, I needed her. I sent her a short message. "Are you still doing long-form investigations?" She replied within an hour, "Always." "What do you have?" We met at a quiet cafe on U Street. I came armed with a folder of documents, 3 USB drives, and the dull ache of betrayal sitting heavy in my chest. Maya listened without interrupting as I laid out every detail: the forged signatures, the drained trust, the fake company my father created to funnel funds, the house loan, the bank records. The dates. She didn't blink once. When I finished, she leaned back slowly. "Rachel. This is massive." "I know. Are you ready for what comes next?" I hesitated. "I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm doing it so no one else like me gets gaslit out of their own life." She nodded. "Then let's burn it down." 2 weeks later, the article dropped. Local power couple accused of financial exploitation. Daughter speaks out. My name wasn't buried in the piece. It was in the headline. The article was meticulous, full of timelines, legal references, source documents. Maya didn't just write it like a story. She wrote it like a case file. By noon, it had over 60,000 shares. I watched the view count climb while sitting on my grandmother's old floral couch, my phone buzzing non-stop. Some messages were from strangers, women, mostly. "This happened to me too. Thank you for speaking up. I thought I was crazy. You made me feel sane." Others were uglier. "You destroyed your family. Gold digger. Ungrateful witch." I ignored them, but the ones I couldn't ignore came from my parents. My mother's voicemail was tight, tearful, trembling with rage. "I can't believe you do this to us. We are your family." My father's was even colder. "Expect to hear from our lawyer." I didn't flinch, because hours later, the real consequences began. The Department of Trusts and Estates announced a formal investigation. My father was quietly placed on leave from his federal contractor job. My mother stepped down from the HOA and the church charity board. Their names, once synonymous with stability in our neighborhood, became whispers of scandal, and I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I exhaled. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was drowning in someone else's lies. The truth was out. And the silence they'd buried me under had finally been broken. It came at 2:11 a.m., a text from Aaron. "Hope you're happy. You've ruined this family." I stared at the screen, bleary-eyed in the dark, the glow of the phone casting shadows across the ceiling. My heart didn't race. I didn't shake. I just lay still, the weight of that sentence pressing against my chest like a hand I'd felt my whole life. Always there, always holding me back. Ruined this family. As if it hadn't been broken long before I said a word. I locked the phone without replying. At least not right away. I needed to think, not react. That was what they always expected from me. The emotional one. The fragile one. The girl who'd cry in her room rather than speak at the dinner table. But that version of me didn't exist anymore. The next morning, I walked through the house slowly, barefoot on cool floors, touching framed photos I hadn't yet taken down. Me and Aaron at the lake when we were kids. Grandma laughing in the kitchen. One of all 4 of us at my high school graduation, me in the corner, their arms wrapped tightly around Aaron. So much of what I'd wanted from them had been hope. Just hope that someday, I'd be enough. And now I was done begging for love that came with strings. I sat at my desk, opened my phone, and wrote back, "You want to know what ruined this family, Aaron? It wasn't me. It was the silence. The secrets. The way they taught us love was conditional. I didn't break us. I just stopped pretending we weren't already broken." I hovered over the send button. Not because I was unsure, but because I knew once I sent it, something inside me would finally snap free. I pressed it. Read. Delivered. Silence. There was no reply. And that silence, unlike all the others, felt like peace. That day, I pulled every last photo of them from the walls and placed them in a box labeled for storage. Not out of anger. Out of clarity, they were no longer the center of my story. Aaron made his choice. He chose denial, loyalty to the image, to the lie we were all raised inside. I used to think he was just blind. But maybe he saw it all, and simply didn't care. He had always been the favorite. The golden son. He didn't want to believe that the pedestal was built on my erasure, but I couldn't carry that weight for him anymore. I dropped the box in the attic, closed the door behind me, and walked downstairs to a sunlit room that felt emptier, but freer. The thread was cut. The last tether snapped, and what remained was mine. It started with a single email, subject line, "I thought I was alone. I'm so glad I found your story." I read it in the quiet of the Oak Ridge house, one hand resting on a chipped mug of coffee, the other trembling slightly over the mouse. She was a woman from Maryland. Early 30s. Disowned by her family after standing up to her stepfather over financial abuse. She had nowhere to go, no support, and no one who believed her, until she read my story. Then came another email, and another. Within a week, I'd heard from people across the country. Women. Men. Siblings. Estranged children. They didn't all have the same story. But the pattern was unmistakable: loyalty weaponized. Silence rewarded. Love treated like a currency, conditional and cruel. I realized what I already knew deep down: I wasn't alone. So I created a space for us, a simple website, built late at night with a free template and a borrowed name, The Unclaimed, not because we were unwanted, but because we were no longer willing to be owned. It wasn't just a blog. It became a movement. I posted resources: how to legally protect your inheritance, how to recognize gaslighting in family systems, where to find housing when your own parents shut the door. People submitted their own stories, anonymously or not, and slowly a community formed. We had Zoom calls, support groups, even meetups in local libraries and church basements. Not everyone could talk right away. Some just sat and listened, tears streaming silently as others spoke the words they hadn't been able to say aloud. I thought it was just me. I always felt like the problem child. I kept trying to earn their love, until I finally realized it was a trap. It was like holding a mirror up to my younger self and whispering, "You were never broken. You were just born into a house that couldn't hold you." The press took notice again. This time, not for the scandal, but for the healing. Maya Trent wrote a follow-up piece titled, "From Betrayed to Builder: How Rachel Monroe is Helping Others Reclaim Their Stories." And this time, the comments were different. They weren't about the money. They were about survival. Community. Hope. I wasn't just a cautionary tale anymore. I was a voice. The house on Oak Ridge, once haunted by betrayal, now hosted monthly workshops and quiet potlucks where strangers became something close to family. People would ask if I forgave my parents, and I always gave the same answer: I don't owe them forgiveness. But I owe myself peace. The Unclaimed gave me that, not because they filled the void my family left, but because they helped me realize that I was never the void. I was the light trying to shine through it. The first morning of true quiet came with rain. Not the violent kind, just a soft, steady drizzle tapping against the windows of the Oak Ridge house. The trees outside swayed gently, and the air smelled like wet leaves and the beginnings of something clean. I stood barefoot in the doorway of the kitchen, coffee in hand, watching the world blur through the glass. For the first time in years, there was no tension in my shoulders. No checking my phone for threatening texts. No waiting for another blow to fall. It was just peace. The house that once felt like a battlefield now breathed around me. The walls no longer echoed with my family's silence. The furniture no longer whispered their betrayal. I had scrubbed every surface, repainted every room, and not just to remove their fingerprints, but to claim what was mine: this house, this life, this story, mine. People say healing isn't linear, and they're right. I still had nights where I'd wake up thinking I heard my father's voice, or where my heart raced remembering how easily my mother lied. But I didn't drown in those memories anymore. I just let them pass. Because now, they don't own me. Every time I host a workshop in the living room, the one where my grandmother used to play piano, I'm reminded that the legacy I inherited wasn't money or property. It was truth. It was the fire to stand alone if I had to. I didn't rebuild my life by pretending the pain never happened. I rebuilt it by finally acknowledging that I was worth saving, even when no one else stepped up. The community at the Unclaimed keeps growing. Dozens of people have reached out just this month. We laugh together. Cry together. We hold space for each other in ways our families never did. Someone once asked me if I wish things had gone differently, if I could turn back the clock and choose a different path. But the truth is, no, because without their betrayal, I never would have discovered my strength. Without the fire, I never would have built something of my own. I used to think belonging meant being accepted by others, but now I know the most powerful kind of belonging is to yourself. When you stop shrinking to be digestible. When you stop handing over your silence to keep the peace. When you finally stand in your own name and say, enough. Today, the Oak Ridge house is filled with the sound of new beginnings, footsteps of survivors, laughter of women reclaiming their worth, the quiet click of keys as someone writes their story for the first time. And as for me, I belong to no one. Not to the family that betrayed me, not to the lies they tried to bury, not to the fear that once kept me quiet. I belong to myself, and that is more than enough. If Rachel's journey moved you, if you've ever felt silenced, overlooked, or betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you, know this: you're not alone. Like, share, comment below with your own story, or simply say I hear you to someone who needs it. And if you believe in the power of reclaiming your voice, subscribe for more real, raw, and redemptive stories like this one.